Look, let's get into our conversation. I think this is important. The media in Ghana is like we are media plus. We don't just tell you what happens. We don't tell you about the problems. We solve them.
Yeah.
That doesn't happen in any other part of the world. Do you think CNN goes around, fixing, plugging holes that government has left open? No. But we
take
do
it
that.
upon ourselves.
And somehow we get less respect than CNN or BBC. Right? It's funny. It's amusing. But let's get into the conversation. Our guest, Suleiman Abrahima, is Executive Director of Media Foundation for West Africa. He joins us over the phone. Sule, good morning to you. Thank you for your time.
Morning, Mr. Joe. Thank you for having me.
I want us to start from a very, I don't know, well, some might think it's controversial. I just think it's about setting the record straight. You have monitored press freedom through the numbers that don't lie for years now, for at least a decade that I've been aware of, but I know you've done it longer. Sule, tell us, when people say that the press is more at risk now than they ever were under previous governments, are they right or are they exaggerating?
Well, Kojo, thank you very much. To answer it directly, I would say that is the reality, especially if you are looking at it from, say, the post-Rawlings era to today. The risk factors have increased. The indirect acts of repression have increased. The fear that journalists have in doing the kind of reporting that, makes journalism worthwhile has increased. And so it is real. It's just to also add that there are some of the reasons that can be attributed to the actions of government, but there are other reasons that can also be attributed to the general contextual environment in our country.
Well, let's break it down. Let's see if we can understand what is behind this surge in danger to the media.
Well, so a number of factors, and I think that in analyzing the media context, the broad indicators would be around legal and regulatory issues, political issues or the political environment, issues around independence of the media, professionalism of the media, questions around ownership, and then the general issue about safety of journalists. Now, and I think we can start it from the last point, which is the safety of journalists. People would always reference perhaps what has been the highest or the most grievous incident that we've recorded over the last at least 1 decade, the murder of Ahmed Swale. And government's, I would say, unwillingness to investigate the matter and bring the perpetrators to book. Apart from that, as you said, we've been monitoring incidents of media rights violations for more than a decade now. Under President Kufuor, there were about 64 incidents of, violations over the 8-year period. Then that reduced to 56 under the Mills Mahama 8 years. And because I did 8 years for Kufuor, it's okay to do Mahama Mills combined 8 years. And so we were witnessing a pattern of reduction. And that was also reflected in the Global Press Freedom Index. And even before the Press Freedom Index, Freedom House also used to do the Freedom of the Press Index. And so the pattern was reflected in both the indices by Reporters Without Borders and Freedom House then. So naturally, one would have been expecting that as our democracy continued to grow, we should be seeing a reduction in the incidence of press freedom violations. But that hasn't been the case. President Akufo-Addo's government is yet to be 8 years. of course, it's just about 5 or so months away. But so far, we have more than 70 incidents recorded. So even far more than what was recorded under Kufuor's regime, where you would say, okay, that was a transition from the PNDC, NDC 1, NDC 2, and so we're still growing. And it's not just the numbers that even matter. What also matters is the gravity of the violations. So if you have a case of the murder of Ahmed Swale, we've had a case where national security have picked up Ajafor and his colleague, blindfolded them, picked them up from their office, took them to national security, blindfolded them, kept them for more than a day. When they were released, they claimed they were tortured, they were beaten up, and all of that. And as I speak to you today, Ajafor's equipment are still in the custody of national security, and this is more than 4 years ago, and we still have these equipment with in national security's custody. You remember the incident of your colleague Latif Idris, and what happened at the police headquarters, the gravity of the violation, and we can go on and on and on. We've had incidents where party tags or people would just storm the studios of a media house and start assaulting a journalist. We've had incidents where journalists are beaten up mercilessly. And in most cases, what is even more saddening is the fact that people who commit the offenses go scot-free, And so the impunity with which these crimes or, violations are committed against journalists is another worrying development. Now, in all this, you would expect that the government of the day would conduct itself or act in a way that would send a message of deterrence to people who intend or actually perpetrate these acts. But unfortunately, if you recall, when we were all, advocating for justice in relation to the Ahmed Swale's murder and describing it as a very grievous press freedom violation, the president, in addressing the Bar Association conference in Takoradi about 2 or so years ago, said, it's unfortunate that people are referring to the Ahmed Swale incident as a matter related to press freedom, and said, look, a legislator was murdered in his house, and nobody has described that as an attack on the legislature. And I think that was really an unfortunate statement to make. Later, after a lot of pressure on him, he backtracked that, and then in another forum in Accra, then promised, and the forum was at the Press Media Freedom Forum, then he says, look, we would make sure that we investigate and bring the perpetrators to book. And that has been how many years now? Nothing has happened. So in terms of the safety dimension, things have really deteriorated. And when you speak to journalists, they will tell you their fear. Again, to add, in 2019, and I always say that was one of the most hectic moments for me in my job, trying to assist Manasseh to be out of this country, following, the incidents of threats, and these were real, and in order to have him protected, we needed to do everything possible to get him out of the country. And issues of visa, because on what basis are you getting the visa? Are you going to tell the embassy that, this journalist is and he's running away? Would the visa be granted, or would it not be granted? It was a very, very hectic moment. Fortunately, at the end of the day, we were able to get him a visa to leave for South Africa. The following year, 2020, actually, ahead of the elections, and perhaps many people don't know this, ahead of the elections, Manasseh had to leave again for Germany for his safety. I don't think that Manasseh is somebody who is at a point where he will say, look, I'm trying to create something so that I can be out of the country or I can get a visa. This is not the type of person we are talking about. So the threats are real, and unfortunately, as people have said, we were expecting better under this government. It never happened. Look at the use of the law on fear and panic and false publication. It's been used under this regime more than any other regime that we know of. even though this was the same president who accused President Mills of applying that law to stifle press freedom, to censor journalists. And that was when, if you recall, your former colleague, Ato Kwame Nadazi, had said something about Ghana Real Estate Development Agency, GREDA, and then the police had invited him about, his source. And then there was another incident where a guy called Nana Dakwa or so had claimed that Rawlings had set his own house ablaze, and the police picked him up for false publication.
Yeah.
President Akufo-Addo in 2011 had cause to accuse the Mills administration of abusing that piece of legislation, which he described as something that had, never been used, put in the shelves, but the government had picked it up, dusted it off, and is now applying vigorously because the government was bereft of the criminal libel law that it could have used against journalists. So if people are expressing fear and people are saying the risks for journalists have increased under this regime, these are the realities. It's not me saying. These are the facts. And it's not surprising, therefore, that we've moved from, in our press freedom ranking, from 26 in 2017 to 23 in 2018. That put us first in Africa. And then we moved on to 30, and from 30 we jumped to 60, and then 62nd, and now 2024 we came back to 50th, which is still not something that we should be proud of.
Let me ask you something about posturing. You've given a number of examples of posturing that comes from the authorities, those who are supposed to be promoting the defense of media freedom. The posturing that doesn't help, right? But there is something that we almost always hear every time the issue of press freedom comes up. We had most of these examples coming through when Kojo Oppong Nkrumah was information minister. We heard him on numerous occasions. Anytime he talked about the importance of press freedom, he would immediately add that it was also important for journalists to be responsible. We needed responsible journalism. Now, some people found that to be the wrong posture. Why though? I mean, is responsible journalism not indeed important?
Well, absolutely, it is important. We cannot be talking about press freedom without also demanding professionalism. And I've always said that unprofessional media conduct constitutes perhaps one of the most serious threats to press freedom. And so it is important that as we talk about press freedom, we also talk about professionalism. And I would always prefer professionalism, or the term professionalism, to responsibility. That is not to rule out the validity of that terminology. But you see, it's all about how the government of the day reacts. Again, President Akufo-Addo at some point made it a point to almost repeat the point that, we are at a point when journalists get it wrong, and you raise their wrongs to them. They say, you are criticizing the media. They say you are attacking press freedom. To the point where party followers then started, when something happens, they say, for journalists, they say we can't criticize them. For journalists, they say, they are above criticism. When you do this and we criticize you, you say press freedom. And that was coming from, an action or a pronouncement by the president. And so, yes, I agree. Responsible media, it's what we really need as a country. If the media decides to be irresponsible, unprofessional, we would not certainly then get the benefits of journalism and the essence or the importance of press freedom. Because press freedom is not just because we want the press to be free, but it's because when the press are free and they are able to do their work well, the benefits are so enormous to society. And so I agree that it is important for all of us to send a message for responsible media. And indeed, Kojo, the truth of the matter is that there are certain journalists who conduct their affairs in such a way that sometimes when they are in trouble, it becomes difficult for you to stand by them, because people would basically play to you what they've been doing and ask you, when these things were happening, what did you do? You know, so yes, it's a fact that there are. I mean, recently, we had calls to, talk about some of the irresponsible and unprofessional things that journalists are doing, which then undermines press freedom. But that should not be grounds for abuses. That's why there are laws. I don't think that we are saying that because of press freedom, there are no laws that should, get errant journalists into trouble. If you are a journalist and you do the wrong thing, the law can deal with you, and that is what we must do, rather than either beat up Storm Studios, create a narrative that would get journalists to be disliked, create a narrative that would spike up antagonism against journalists and all of that. That is what the problem is.
Let me ask you about our legal framework. In fact, I'll do that when we come back from these messages. We're talking to Suleiman Abrahima, Executive Director of the Media Foundation for West Africa. We're having this conversation in anticipation of our Thursday national dialogue on defending press freedom. Crucial national conversation. When we come back, we'll ask about the legal framework. Is it where it should be? Does it still need tweaking? Are there laws that put journalists in danger? Let's explore after these. Is our legal framework part of the problem or part of the solution? Do we have laws that do protect us, or are we still working with some laws like the ones under which people are picked up for causing fear and panic and so forth? Are we working under some laws that rather pose a danger to the press?
Well, Kojo, I think that Ghana has one of the most robust constitutional guarantees for press freedom. If you look at Chapter 12 of our Constitution, it is replete with very, very concrete and robust, guarantees for press freedom. Of course, there is a provision that also talks about the fact that all these guarantees are subject to rules and regulations and laws, that are necessary for democratic order. And when the NMC was created and came into being in 1993 as one of the very first constitutionally mandated, constitutional bodies, there was a seminar organized in 1993 in anticipation of the liberalization of the airways. And that the outcome of that conference in 1993 contains very, very profound, guidance that ought to have been put in place to ensure that the constitutional guarantees that we have truly are implemented in ways that would, give us all the benefits that we must have. Unfortunately, over time, and that's about 30 years now, I think that we've been relaxed. Institutions that ought to have taken actions have failed to take action. And here, one of them is actually the National Media Commission. As far as I can recall, it was in 2015 that the NMC made an attempt to come up with a piece of an LI, which was LI 2224, to try and somehow manage to regulate the space and grant some power to the NMC so that their regulatory powers can be enforced. Unfortunately, that LI contained regulations that some of us raised questions about, and therefore it wasn't surprising when the Supreme Court said various regulations within the LI, specifically 4, 5, 6, all the way to 12, and Regulation 22, were at variance with the constitutional provisions, and to that extent were null and void, and basically threw out that LI. Since then, nothing stops the NMC from, proposing a new ally, taking into consideration the views expressed by the Supreme Court. And in fact, if you read the Supreme Court's ruling, it says that the NMC knows what it should do. So the Supreme Court, in its ruling, admits and accepts the fact that what the NMC was attempting to do was necessary. But then they went overboard with certain regulations within the LI. And therefore, if they wanted to do the right thing, they knew the steps to take. Till now, that's about almost 10 years now, nothing has happened. Of course, we've been battling for the passage of the broadcasting law for almost 2 decades now. Nothing has happened. Then we have Section 76 of the Electronic Communications Act and Section 208 of the Criminal and Other Offences Act, Act 29, that contain, that makes room for this whole thing about causing fear and panic and so on, that, as I said, this government appears to have weaponized over the last 7-8 years to really repress people, get people into trouble. Some people have been arrested, Bobie Ansan, Mensa Thompson, or Ken Thompson, and a few others. In fact, recently I read a report about somebody having been jailed 1 month for publication of false news. Well, so long as the law is there, you will say that it must be therefore implemented. But these are bad laws, because we cannot say that we've decriminalized libel, which means that, yes, there are still media offenses, but those offenses must be such that they must not be criminalized. People can be fined and all of that. But if we still have laws in our books that still criminalizes media, laws that criminalize media offenses, then, as somebody would say, have we gone or have we come? I think that over the period, people did not bother because those laws were not being applied. Except in the Atoko Abenadazi and that guy who said Rollins burnt his house. That it was brought up, but even that, it didn't go anywhere. It was just about police invitation, and then in the end, it ended there. But as I said, President Akufo-Addo even had issues with that. But then during his regime, we see the weaponization of those pieces of legislation to get people into trouble. So I think, as we've been advocating, we still have those laws that we need to deal with. And we can regulate our media space without criminalizing media offenses. Of course, no one wants a proliferation of false information. Today you are there, somebody says this. The next day you are there, somebody says that. And we say we don't have a law to regulate that. It's important we have that.
I think this is a good place to wrap up, because you've obviously got lots more to say, but we'll save it for the national dialogue on hashtag Defend Media Freedom GH, which is happening this Thursday, the 29th of August 2024.